This is the Athlete Within podcast. I'm Kate Allgood. This podcast is about understanding what actually happens internally when you compete, especially when the pressure rises. Because performance isn't just about what you're capable of, it's about what you can access when it matters. And over time, learning how to stay steady under pressure so you can play freely. There's a moment in competition that a lot of athletes recognize almost immediately, even if they've never put words to it. It doesn't usually start big. Sometimes it's just a small shift, a little more tension than usual, a little more awareness than you'd like, a little more thinking than feels natural. And you can feel it. You might not fully understand it in that moment, but you know something is starting to change. The game feels slightly different. Your timing feels slightly off. Your thoughts are a little louder, and there's often a point right there where the athlete senses it. Something's not quite the same. What happens in that moment matters more than most athletes realize, because that's often where performance either stabilizes or continues to drift. Not because the athlete suddenly lost their ability, but because of how they respond to that shift. And this is where many athletes get caught, because the instinct is almost always the same. They try to fix it, they tighten up, they try to focus harder, be more precise, stop thinking, get it back. There's a sense of urgency to correct whatever just changed, and that instinct makes sense. Something feels off, and when something feels off in competition, it feels like it needs to be corrected quickly. But what most athletes don't realize is that the way they try to fix it is often the thing that moves them further away from what they're trying to get back to. Because instead of reconnecting to the moment, they start trying to control the moment, and that shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You move from playing to managing, from reacting to monitoring, from being in the moment to trying to fix the moment. And the more you try to fix it, the more your attention goes to everything that feels off. The timing that doesn't feel right, the movement that feels slightly different, the decision you're not fully confident in, and the more you notice those things, the further away the performance starts to feel. For some athletes, this turns into what feels like a spiral. Not always dramatic, but steady. A little more hesitation, a little more tension, a little more thinking, and over a short period of time, the version of you that felt available earlier in the competition doesn't feel as accessible anymore. And that's where frustration builds, because you can feel the gap. You know what it's supposed to feel like, and you know you're not quite there, and that creates even more urgency to get back. And this is where one of the most important shifts needs to happen, because the goal in that moment is not to feel perfect again. That's what most athletes are chasing. They're trying to return to a feeling, to get back to how it felt earlier, or how it feels in practice, or how it feels when everything is working. But the more you chase that feeling, the more you end up comparing what's happening now to something that already passed. And that pulls your attention out of the moment you're actually in. What helps in that moment is not trying to get back to something, is learning how to stay with what's in front of you, even if it doesn't feel perfect. Because the moment things start to shift, your system is already a little more activated. Your awareness is already a little heightened. And trying to eliminate that usually just adds another layer of effort on top of it. Instead of settling the system, it often increases the sense that something is wrong. One of the most useful things an athlete can begin to do is recognize the shift earlier without immediately reacting to it, not ignoring it, but not making it mean something either, just noticing it. There's a difference between feeling something change and immediately deciding that it's a problem, and most athletes skip that space in between. They feel the shift and they instantly go to fixing it. But that immediate reaction is often what pulls them further away. When you can notice the shift without attaching meaning to it, something opens up. There's less urgency, less pressure to correct everything at once, and from there, the focus becomes much simpler. Not fixing everything, not getting back to a perfect state, but returning to something stable and familiar within the moment. Something that keeps you connected. It could be your breathing. It could be the next play. It could be a simple cue that brings your attention back to what's in front of you. Not in a forced way, but in a way that gives your attention somewhere to land. Because one of the things that happens when athletes feel things slipping is that their attention starts to scatter or tighten too much. It moves away from the moment and into evaluation, projection, or control. And bringing it back doesn't require a big reset. It usually requires something small and consistent, something that grounds you just enough to stay in the moment instead of jumping ahead or pulling away. Another important piece here is letting go of the idea that something needs to feel a certain way for you to perform well. This is something that trips a lot of athletes up. They believe that in order to perform at their best, they need to feel a certain level of confidence or calmness or clarity. When they don't feel that, they assume they're not in a good place to perform. But performance doesn't require perfect internal conditions. It requires the ability to stay connected to what you're doing, even when those conditions aren't perfect. And that's where the shift starts to happen. Not in trying to remove what you're feeling, but in changing how you relate to it. Instead of seeing the shift as something that needs to be eliminated, you start to see it as something you can work within, something you can stay steady through, and that creates a very different experience. Because now you're not fighting the moment, you're staying with it. Over time, this becomes a skill. The ability to notice when things start to change, not overreact to it, and bring your attention back to something simple and present. It's not dramatic. It doesn't always feel like a big shift in the moment, but it keeps you from drifting further away. It gives you something stable to return to instead of something to chase. And that's really the difference. Most athletes, when things start to slip, start chasing something. A feeling, a level of play, a version of themselves that felt better earlier. And the more they chase, the more they move away from what's actually available to them in that moment. But when you stop chasing and start reconnecting, even in a small way, you give yourself the chance to stay in it. That doesn't mean everything instantly turns around. It doesn't mean you suddenly feel perfect again. But it does mean you're no longer adding layers on top of what's already happening. You're not making the moment heavier than it needs to be. And that alone can stabilize more than most athletes expect. Because the goal isn't to control every moment of competition. It's to stay connected enough that your ability can keep showing up even when things aren't perfect. And that's something that can be trained. Not by eliminating the moments where things shift, but by learning how to move through them differently. That's what we'll keep building on as we move forward. Because the more you understand what actually helps in those moments, the less those shifts have to define your performance. If something in this episode resonated with you, or helped you better understand your own experience in competition, then that awareness matters. Because the more clearly you understand what's happening internally under pressure, the more intentionally you can begin to work with it. And that's what we'll keep building on throughout this season. This is The Athlete Within.